Hey guys, I wanted to take a moment here to think about how we can diagram externalities. Now, an externality is when the production of a good or service or the consumption of a good or service affects people who aren't involved in the market. In other words, when the production or consumption of a good affects people who aren't producers or consumers of the good. So it really could be that it affects anybody who's not involved in that transaction. For today, let's focus just on negative externalities of production. And so we'll be focusing on the supply curve. And let's just imagine here that the externality that we're thinking of is that the production of a good pollutes a river that is nearby the factory. All right. And so anyone who enjoyed that river, anyone who lives downwater of that river, is going to be affected. This isn't usually the case with the market. All right, this is the scenario that we have. So let's see if our understanding of the supply curve can give us an understanding of how we would diagram this situation. Now, we know as we look along the supply curve that we might have a point here. And this point, just like any point on the supply curve, it tells us the quantity of the good that producers are willing and able to produce at the given price level in a given period of time with everything else remaining equal. In this case, we can see that at a price level of 6, producers are willing and able to produce, just about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we said it was in thousands, so 7,000 units of the good or service. And we can see from this spot here that if the price rises to 8, the market is able to supply an additional 2,000 units of the good. Why is this? Why is it that as the price increases, the quantity supplied increases? Well, one nice way of thinking about it for this particular situation is that as price increases, more producers are able to enter the market. And the producers who weren't able to make normal profit at 6 all of a sudden become able to make normal profit when the price goes up to 8. And so if we think about this, if we think that total revenue minus total cost equals your profit, we might realize then that the supply curve is related to cost, whereas revenue is just a function of price times quantity. So, in order to make profit, a producer is going to have a total cost that is at least equal to the total revenue. And so, because of that, we can start to see here that in fact, the curve, the supply curve, represents not just the willingness and ability of producers, but it also represents the cost of producing an additional unit of the good. And this we call the marginal cost, which is usually abbreviated MC. So if we come here and we think that in fact the cost of producing the unit is the marginal cost, well, what is the cost of producing a good? The cost is going to be equal to the cost for producers and the cost for everyone else. Usually, in most markets, the cost for producers is the total cost. So if we think about something like, oh, I don't know, the market for a service like babysitting or delivery, we could imagine that if a babysitter provides 1 hour of babysitting or 2 hours of babysitting, the cost for them is really just the opportunity cost that they're giving up. Or if somebody provides an hour of tutoring, perhaps they have to cover some of their transportation costs. We definitely think of the normal costs as being rent, wages, interest, and the profit which is owed for the entrepreneurship. However, in our particular example right here, we have an additional cost, which is this cost of pollution. And so we can think of that as the ways in which the pollution now detracts from the benefit. And we can actually put a value on that. So if this supply curve here, this is equal to the private cost for producers. So let's call this the marginal private cost. We'll just get this out of our way here. We can call that the marginal private cost. Now, what would we normally do if we needed to increase the costs of factors of production? Well, that would take our supply curve, and in that case, we would have to shift our supply curve further back. In fact, we might, in this case, shift it. Oh, let's move it a little further up. There, we've increased our supply curve. And more or less, we've increased it so that the distance between the two supply curves is about $4 worth. This increase in $4 represents the cost of the pollution. For every unit of the good that we produce, there's $4 of pollution that's created. So this now gives us the marginal social cost of the good that's being produced. The difference between them is the external cost, in this case, the $4. Now, if we come back and we add in a demand curve, we can start to see that when the price of the good is $8 and the producer is willing and able, or the market is willing and able to produce 9,000 units, actually the social cost of that is closer to, oh, I've been saying $4 here, but actually that's just a misreading. That should be $3. We can see here that that's equal to 11. So we can see that we have the quantity that might be ideal for the market, but then the quantity that is being produced by the market. So in this case, we can see what's best for society would be to produce at the intersection here. It looks like that price is just around $9.50. This then we can relabel as quantity optimal. But right here is the quantity of the market, because of course the producer is not paying the cost of the pollution, so they'll be willing and able to provide at this point here, which I'll call point A. This point we can call point B. The unit in this case, the good or the service, is being overproduced. And we can see how much it's being overproduced by, because it's being overproduced by these 2,000 units. What is the impact that this is having on society? Well, we actually, just in the same way, when we overproduce a good, maybe because the government comes in and subsidizes it, we can actually find the same area of welfare loss, which in this case, we'll take the vertex at the optimal point and then find this triangle off to the side. We're now able, actually in this case, to be able to quantify the welfare loss that's being produced. Because certainly the increased production of this good or service does have some benefit to society, but it also has this negative effect here, which we can actually calculate because we know the base of the triangle is 3, and we know that the height of the triangle is 2,000. And we know that the area of a triangle is 1/2 base times height. So we can see here that the welfare loss is $6,000. We can actually point out the extent to which this pollution is harming society. And we can put a dollar figure on that. So I hope that this video has given you a sense of the ways in which the difference between marginal private cost and marginal social cost are really just related to a shift that we're familiar with, which is an increase in the costs of factors of production. And so when you think about it that way, an increase in the costs of factors of production has really just shown us that, in fact, the good is being overproduced. And so by combining our simple shift of an increase in the cost of factors of production with our knowledge of what a subsidy diagram is, we can now create our externalities diagram. So just to review, if you need to draw a subsidies diagram, an externalities diagram, what you're going to do is just draw a normal supply curve. For this case, I won't pay any attention to elasticity with a normal demand curve. But in this case, don't call it supply, call it marginal private cost. That's the way that producers will feel. This represents the price or the cost of each additional unit of production. But in our case, we're going to have another curve. Our other curve here is going to show the external cost. This is going to be the marginal private cost plus the cost to anyone else in society. And then anyone else plus producers is going to end up equaling all of society. So that's the marginal social cost. And so we end up with 2 equilibria, or 2 points. The market is only going to function at the point where producers. So that's going to be our quantity market. But where we wish the market was producing is at quantity optimal. So we can label in our points here. There's the optimal price and the market price. In this case, we wish the price were lower because that would reduce the production of the good back towards our optimal point. Then we can add in our welfare loss just by drawing in a vertical line showing the external cost and adding in our welfare loss there. This then would be a correct externalities diagram when we're talking about a good or a service whose production has costs or harmful effects that affect people other than the producers.